It's time to wake up and take a look at your super. You could be sitting on a monster. With the latest Australian Retirement Trust app, managing your super is easy. Check your balance, control your contributions, and track how you're invested, all in just a few taps wherever you are. Plus, get notifications and handy tips. Download the new and improved Australian Retirement Trust app today to find out if you're sitting on a monster. Get it now on the App Store and Google Play and see what your super's been up to.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this, our fourth and final webcast in this Retirement Essentials series. My name is Josh Van Gestel. I'm the Senior Manager of Education here at Australian Retirement Trust, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank all of you for making time to be here this evening. Over recent weeks, we've talked to you about how you can plan for and prepare yourself for retirement, as well as make sure that you thrive as you lead into it. Tonight, what we'd like to do is talk to you about how you can be fulfilled in retirement, but also how you can be prepared as things will inevitably change. Investment markets will continue to fluctuate and move on you, and you might also see circumstances or opportunities come in and out of your life as your retirement journey goes on. So we'll talk about this more shortly, but before we do that, I'd first like to make acknowledgement to our traditional owners.
At Australian Retirement Trust, we're here for all Australians, today and every day throughout your working lives in retirement. We acknowledge that we work and live on the lands that have been cared for by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people for over 65,000 years. At Australian Retirement Trust, our communities span far and wide, from Yanjin and Warren in the east to Burraloo in the west, to Naarm and Lutruwita in the south, and as far north as Zenith Cass. As we gather today, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of these lands and waters and their continuing connection to country and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We recognise the diverse cultures, laws and elders across Australia. We strive to listen and learn from this legacy to help create a better future for all generations, no matter where you are or where you're from.
Please be aware that all the information we're going through tonight is of a general advice nature only. So we encourage you to think about how what we go through may apply to you and your circumstances, and also encourage you to reach out for further advice and assistance where it is pertinent. Throughout tonight's presentation, you'll also probably have questions from time to time, and we encourage you to do a couple of things. Either engage with our moderators who are online now, and any questions that you raise that are pertinent to our broader audience, they'll make sure to put through to us to look at in Q&A later tonight. But you also have the opportunity to reach out to one of our financial advice services, either our team internally, or we can put you in touch with an external advisor to help you for more complicated needs. But I encourage you as well, where you've already got your own financial advisor and tonight might raise considerations, questions or issues that you would like to actually have a conversation on or more deeply explore, please reach out to them to assist you. Now, as I've said, over recent weeks, we've covered off a number of topics to consider, both in terms of setting yourself up for retirement, but also growing your retirement savings and preparing yourself. But there's a couple of things that you need to also be prepared for when you finally get there. We are seeing that people are living for longer. And I think way back 4 weeks ago, I talked about the fact that in my own family, I've got a father who's just turned 92, a mother who next week actually turns 91. Happy birthday, Mum. And I've also got aunties who are well into their century. So for me, I should consider that my life expectancy, and being a lengthy one, is going to be something I should plan for. What we know is that if we took 50 females and 50 males at the age of 65, is that 61 of them would still be alive at the age of 85. We know that 38 will still be alive at 90 and 15 will be alive at 95. But in the changing dynamic that we have in Australia, remembering that we are one of the healthiest developed countries in the world, we will, at the age of 100, have 3 of those people still with us. So you should have some expectation that you could, or possibly very likely will, live a very long life that you need to fund for. The other thing you'll need to consider, and we'll address this in more detail throughout this evening's presentation, is that you should be prepared that your income needs and spending requirements and circumstances will change over time. We tend to think about our retirement savings and the income we need in retirement being a set number that will continue year in and year out. But the reality is that as we get older, our leisure pursuits and costs associated with that will reduce, while our needs around health and aged care will increase. We should also expect in this period that where this income comes from will change. Earlier on in our retirement, we might see a lot of this coming from our superannuation. We may also see some of it coming from employment if we still work in some way early into our retirement years. Later on in our retirement, we would expect that a lot more of this may be funded by the age pension or other sources. So you should yourself have the expectation that your income needs will change, the income you need as a result will fluctuate, and the sources that are funding that will ebb and flow over time. As we've talked about in previous episodes of this series, you might see that the age pension access you have this year may be different next year, and the year after may be different again, depending on those different influences of your super, employment income, and other sources. Some of this we will continue to unpack. The other thing that I want to make sure we're discussing with you tonight is to have the expectation again that your retirement isn't something you set and forget when you get there. Your retirement is going to be in some ways volatile, and it will experience fluctuations with investment markets, changes in legislation, and other risks and considerations, including how long you may live for. So we need to actually face into this, but also consider its opportunities. There might be times throughout your retirement where you have the ability to add more to your retirement savings. You might think about downsizing the home, or might come into windfall that give you new opportunities to consider. The other things that we'll be talking about tonight, and I'll pass to my very special guest in a moment, Rhonda, who will start to take us through this, is it's also the stage in life where we start about transitioning our wealth to our dependents, but we also have to be conscious of protecting our own wealth as well. We are seeing increases in elder abuse, typically financially, as well as scams and issues that you really need to be aware of. So tonight is really to give you some sense as to the things you need to think about in retirement, both the positive, but also some of the areas that you need to be conscious of, mindful of, and perhaps address. So on that note, I'll pass over to Rhonda to start really talking about how your age pension can be a key component of your retirement story. Thanks, Rhonda.
Thanks very much, Josh. Lovely to be here tonight with you all. So my name's Rhonda. I've worked in the education area for about 10 years of my 14 years in super and spoken to many of you. I'm sure some of you are sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, is that old duck still with us? And yes, she is. So we're going to start off talking about navigating the age pension, and we're going to touch on eligibility, but it's more what some of the financial choices you make, how that may impact your age pension. Now, many members I speak to over the years are convinced that they're never going to get $1 in age pension right throughout their retired life, but I can tell you, and this is a statistic from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, that approximately 60% of Australians living in retirement do receive the age pension, a part age pension possibly. 2/3 of that 60% actually receive the full age pension. So let's have a look and see how it works. So initially, as I said, many Australians will receive payments, but there are some criteria to be met. So initially it's that age, 67, up until a few years ago it was 65, but it's been 67 for a couple. On top of that, 10 years residency. And Services Australia will also apply both income and asset tests to establish what you are entitled to. The figures I'm going to show you now are the full age pension amounts for both an individual and a couple. So $11.79 a fortnight for an individual and a couple $8.89 each. When we're talking about the age pension, it is suggested if you're applying for it, approximately 3 months or 13 weeks before you turn 67, have that paperwork completed and sent into them. Again, we get a real mix of responses as to how well that went. Some people say, oh my gosh, filled in the paperwork, it seemed like a matter of a couple of weeks and it was all through. Others say they've had to repeat paperwork, send in forms over again, and it's taken a considerably longer time. Now, you can get help from ART with this. We've partnered with Retirement Essentials to help work out your eligibility for the age pension, as well as assisting you with the paperwork. So that's a bonus. Now, what if you love the idea of still keeping your foot in the door as far as employment goes? What impact do you think that may have on any age pension? And do you think you can actually earn some money on top of receiving the pension? Let's have a look. Can I work? Absolutely. So there was a work bonus introduced a number of years ago where you can actually earn up to $300 a fortnight before your age pension is impacted. For the very first year, so new recipients receive an additional $4,000 for the first year on top of that, making the amount $11,800. So what we're going to look at now is whether the way you work, as far as if it's a regular amount, and look, I've got a few girlfriends at my age, you can imagine I do, who are on the age pension. One of them works a regular amount of hours each fortnight. The other one in particular works a month working towards a Christmas in December, and so she receives payment really just in one part of the year. But what we'll look at now is how that may impact any age pension payments. So we've got the lovely Jim here, looking very happy in retirement. And Jim has retired but loves the idea of still doing a bit of work, so he works as a casual teacher. You'll see there across the 4 fortnights, his income does fluctuate, basically from not receiving any income at all from employment right through to $1,500 in one particular fortnight. So let's have a look and see the impact of these earnings on his age pension. Okay, so Jim started out with a $1,000 work bonus, and in the first fortnight actually earned $1,000, so no impact on his age pension at all. In the second week, $500 was earned, so just over, and indeed that may have the potential to reduce his age pension. In the third fortnight, no earnings whatsoever, so the $300 bonus rolls across to the fourth fortnight, so we have a total of $600 that can be used. However, Jim's done quite a bit of work in that fortnight and he's actually earned $1,500. So, being $900 over the limit, there again is a potential to reduce his age pension. So it really is a matter of working which way will suit you. Some, as I say, like the idea of regular income. Others can't actually pick and choose when it is casual work. And look, I've spoken to members and friends as well that say, do you know what? We don't actually mind our pension going up and down a little because we just love the idea of being able to work, catch up with work colleagues, friends otherwise, keep those brain cells ticking over so it's not such a bad thing after all. So next we're going to look at gifting. And again, I know that we've discussed the gifting rules, how they work, so I'll just touch on those, but then how and when you gift, how that may impact your age pension as well. So here are the gifting rules. A 1-year limit of $10,000, a 5-year limit of $30,000. Now that applies whether you are a single person, an individual or a couple. And I have had the question before, someone has said to me, oh, so that's the amount that you can gift to each person. No, that's not the case. It's actually a collective amount. So we'll have a look at a little case study now just to see what impact that may have. So we've got a lovely couple here who are just thinking about providing their daughter with a lump sum or a payment of $50,000 that would look to reduce her mortgage. So they haven't gifted any money before, but what do you think this may mean for their age pension? Well, it will depend. So their options are they might give it to their daughter all in one lump sum. They might spread it out over a 5-year period. Here we go. If it's done in the first year, basically they will have exceeded that $10,000 cap by $40,000. So the full $40,000 is going to be counted under the income and assets test for the next 5 financial years. What if they spread it out? $10,000 a year for the 5 years. Well, again, for the first 3 years, they'll be fine because they haven't reached that $30,000 until that point. But for the last 2 years, the $10,000 will be counted for the next following 5 years. Now, they could consider loaning that money to their daughter. Just to be mindful, you do need to have documentation and proof in place that this is what you're actually going to do. And of course, that loan will be deemed as a financial asset until it is repaid. At that point, you might say, well, do you know what? We'd really just like you to have the money. Don't worry about giving it back. Then, of course, it will fall completely into the gifting scenario. So lots of things to think about. When we talk about our super, there may be occasions or you may be feeling that you do need to stretch that super a little bit further so that your standard of living is just how you want it to be. So what if you don't have enough income to live on? What are the steps you can take? And you do have a few options. Firstly, adjusting your lifestyle. And look, I don't mean to sound patronising at all. You probably guessed, looking at the wrinkles and the older look, I'm fast approaching this phase of life myself, just coming up 69. So while I've been working, we've managed to have a few nice holidays overseas, and I'd love to think going into retirement I could keep that up on a regular basis. But in reality, we're not saying stop doing what you're doing, but you just may need to change it up a bit. So for me, it might not be those trips every 2 years. It might be a trip every 3 or 4 years, possibly closer to home. So still travelling, but just not quite as I had been intending. Working part-time, is that a consideration for you? I have dreams of actually working a patissier, but I don't know how good that would actually be for me when I finally retire. But you may have the option of working a day a week or a few hours a week, or for that set period of year. Of course, that's going to create a bit of extra income. My husband's actually got a favourite saying where he loves the idea of me working, because when I'm working, I'm not out there spending. So that is a thought as well. Reviewing your retirement savings. So we'd always say people often, as they're heading towards retirement, think really clearly and strongly and put lots of plans in place as to what they're going to do with it. But often when they actually reach that retired stage, they take their foot off the pedal. So we'd of course say, keep an eye on your retirement savings. We're there to help you with that financial advice. But have a look at how your money's invested, and Josh will touch on this a little later. How much are you drawing down? Is it too much? Is it too little? Just keep an eye on it to make sure it is going to last the distance for you. We also will now talk about using some of the equity in your home, both through downsizing and tapping into that equity to provide some more funds to live on in retirement. So looking at downsizing first, and again I'll just touch on this, but it's more the impact it may have on your age pension. So downsizing's been around since 2017. The amount of $300,000 hasn't changed, and that is per person. What has changed is the actual age that you can put those downsizer payments into your super. It was initially 65, but it has dropped to age 55. So the idea is you may wish to sell that home. For me, typical, living in old Queensland on a double block, lots of maintenance and lots of groundwork, so it could well be a consideration. So we're going to have a look at a little case study now. Again, a couple who have taken that step to move from presumably the bigger, older house. They're standing in front of a newer home, single level, lower maintenance. And what it's actually done, it's freed up an amount of $500,000 that they're looking at putting into their superannuation. So I've mentioned $300,000 each on the previous slide. So absolutely $500,000 is doable between a couple. Now, one of the good things about the downsizer payment is it literally breaks all the other rules. So you don't need to have or be a certain age. It doesn't matter what age you are, you can put that downsizer payment in. It doesn't matter what your balance is, and it doesn't matter what you've contributed in the last few years. If you've reached the limits and so forth, it completely disregards all of those rules. But what we'll touch on now is how it may impact your age pension. So remember I talked earlier about age pension. They look at both the income test and the asset test. So in this situation, the deemed income from that extra money, if it was put into their super, would actually reduce their age pension by just over $200 a fortnight. However, it's the worst outcome of the income and asset. And when we look at the asset test, that large lump sum actually takes them over the threshold, and their age pension would reduce quite significantly, $1,290 a fortnight. So absolutely an impact on the age pension. The couple, to retain that standard of living they had, would need to be drawing from their super to live the same way. And of course, if one of the partners actually died unexpectedly, it may eliminate age pension altogether. But again, you need to weigh this up. Are you going to have a more enjoyable life living in a smaller home, closer to facilities, closer to family and so forth? So absolutely the financial is one to consider, but you need to look at the overall picture. So now we will touch on accessing some equity out of your home and how you can do that. Now the first one is by what we call a reverse mortgage. So you can access a lump sum against the equity in your home to provide an income over your retired years. You do need to obviously have a really good look at this though, because there are fees and loan rates applicable that are higher than the normal property loan rates. So yes, it can create an income for you. And we do, of course, meet members that don't like the idea of actually leaving their home. They're really well established in their neighbourhood. They've got a good network, know all the neighbours who have lived there for years. But this is where you may consider staying if your actual source of funds living in retirement is dropping below a level you would like. So with the reverse mortgage, lots of things to take into account. As I said, often a higher interest rate, but there is built in a guarantee that the level of the loan would never exceed the value of your home. and the loan tends to get repaid when the property is sold or when the owner passes away. So that's a reverse mortgage. We also have one that's run by Services Australia, and that's called the Home Equity Access Scheme. So again, you can access a lump sum, you can access a fortnightly amount, or it can be a combination of the two. Built in again is guarantee that the amount would not be greater than the value of the home, so that you're not likely to have someone knocking on your door saying, that's it, all over, you're out the door. But it just may provide those people that want to stay in their home with that, I guess, the safety of knowing that there will be funds that they can access to continue living a happy retirement. Now, one thing I do get a little excited about, because often I speak to people and they know a lot of what we discuss, but the Seniors Healthcare Card has had an increase in the income in the last few years. So what is the Seniors Healthcare Card and who can access it? How it works is it's available for people who are age pension age, but they're not actually receiving any age pension. And again, the number of people I speak to who say, Rhonda, we would love to just get $1 or $2 of the age pension because it means that we can get that card, concession card. Well, a Seniors Healthcare Card may be available for you as well. If you look at those amounts, I fit into the middle one with a husband. So when I'm retired, if our income, and of course that's through employment deemed and so forth, is below that threshold, we would be eligible for one. What does it provide? Well, it does provide reduction in prescriptions, a higher Medicare refund, and also more chance of being bulk billed by your doctor. Now, to find out more information about the age pension, we've got some great information on our website, and I'd also suggest having a look at the Services Australia information, their website as well. We often come in contact with people, and it's a long name, called Financial Information Service Officers, abbreviated to FISOs for short. They're often long in the tooth, very knowledgeable. They don't provide financial advice, but often when we speak to our members who've seen a FISO, they are blown away with the level of information they have received and the difference or the confidence they can provide when they're looking to make decisions about moving forward in retirement. So that's it for me now. What I haven't done very cleverly is referred to any of the pages in our booklet, and you'll see there's page 28, and on a couple of other slides there were pages mentioned as well. So make sure you're having a look at those when you get time. And at this stage, I'm going to pass back to Josh.
Thank you very much, Rhonda. And as Rhonda's gone through, firstly, don't you love the wisdom that is in that brain? And Rhonda is actually a shorter stature than me, so there's a lot of wisdom in that stature. But what Rhonda's gone through is some really complex issues and some areas that we often see people, whether it's gifting, downsizing, other things that people undertake, they don't necessarily prepare for it or plan it out or get some guidance before they do that. I think about in my own case, I actually had an old neighbour who downsized and came into significant windfall as a result of that and didn't realise that she'd lose the age pension. So it is something you really need to consider before you take major action. What you also need to consider before you take major action, that was a nice segue, wasn't it, is your investments in retirement. And why this is important is we very often see and hear and often witness people thinking about the fact that when they start their retirement, they almost feel like their investment journey has come to an end. We tend to see very conservative behaviours come into investments and actually that people take on a much shorter term view. And although that's understandable, it's also important to understand that your retirement, once you hit that age, your retirement may be something that you're having to fund for 20, 30 years, even potentially longer. That is still a very long time for you to be invested and be taking some opportunities. So in thinking about that, and this is a slide that we've referred to a couple of times throughout the series, it's important to think about the growth that your superannuation can have over the long term. And what we've got here is $10,000 that is being invested in a range of our investment options and just held. No additional monies are being added onto these initial investments. So these are growing purely with compound interest, and we're showing here growth over about a 20-year period. So think about this as a period of retirement. The thing that's really important to note as well is that what we're wanting to achieve here is investment returns that stay well above inflation. Remember, as we discussed last week, that inflation basically eats away at your purchase power. So if inflation is going up, costs is going up, things become more expensive, and it means that your earnings have to be working harder to stay ahead of that. So in retirement, that becomes even more important. So what I'm wanting to do over the next 5 minutes or so is just play out a couple of scenarios. They are going to be a little extreme, but it's to try and make a point around how you should still be actively thinking about your investments and actively thinking about the exposure of those investments well into your retirement. Firstly, I'm showing here the default investment option that we have for our retired members. And it's showing that over the last few decades that there has been volatility. On a year-on-year basis, you can see that there's been two significant downturns, 2008 with the global financial crisis and more recently with the COVID downturn. And although there are some other years with lower returns, you can see that on the whole, this has actually provided quite strong growth. What should also be noted though is within each one of these years, even if you think back over the last 12 months, you could have extreme volatility. So it really becomes a challenge for members, particularly those entering in or well into retirement, to look beyond those short-term volatility areas, whether that be within a year or year on year. Think about how you would have felt if you were in retirement and 2008 occurred. How would you have felt if you were in retirement and we had another downturn like we experienced with COVID? How did you feel over the last 12 months where we saw two extremes in the market? A severe downturn at the beginning of 2025 and then a very dramatic and quick recovery. It's really important for us to think about when we see investment markets fluctuate like that, we don't necessarily think in financial terms. We understandably think in emotional terms. And the problem with that is our emotions will actually try and drive a behaviour opposite to what we should be doing. When markets are high, when everyone's buying into gold, for example, and we're seeing gold soar as it is now, the obvious question we get from people is how do we invest in gold? Or it might be the same with cryptocurrencies or other parts of the market that are booming. But the fact is that you're coming in at the wrong time. Conversely, when markets are going down dramatically, when we're seeing volatility such as earlier this year, people are wanting to leave the market. It is actually at these points you should be doing the opposite. At the top of the market, you do not want to be buying into those investments. And at the bottom of the market, you don't necessarily want to be selling out. The other issue that we see around this is, particularly when people sell out, is them then not knowing or having anxiety about when to buy back in. We very quickly see people move out of a market when there's a downturn, but are very, very, very slow to respond to go back into that. So let me give you a scenario that, as I said, plays this out quite dramatically, but really highlights the point. What we've got here is a person who's started a pension account with us, so a retirement income account, with $300,000. And I've chosen a date just prior to the COVID downturn. The thing to take note of is that this person's investment earnings will also be having, or their account balance rather, will be having a drawdown of at least 4% in this scenario. So they've got investment returns going on to their $300,000, but they are also withdrawing an income stream. If we then saw that play out in the 1 year over COVID, what you'd see is that depending on how they were invested and with that income being drawn out, they're going to be worse off. So understandably, as an emotional reaction, we saw a lot of people move into cash. And although cash would have actually stabilised some of that return and flattened out some of the losses, what you can see here is that that withdrawal rate of income they needed to take of 4% was probably greater than the cash return. So we were still seeing that balance progressively go down, although not as strongly. What though if we play it out over 5 years? If that person stayed the course through COVID and instead of moving to cash, stayed how they were invested, in spite of the COVID downturn and in spite of taking that income of at least 4% a year, what you're seeing is that in most scenarios, they've actually ended up the same or better off than they originally were. Now, this reflects, much like Brian talked to us about a couple of weeks ago, that over the last decade, that period following COVID, we've seen incredibly strong returns. And so people in superannuation have actually benefited strongly from that. And this is an illustration to that to some point. But what if you were that person that moved to cash at the height of COVID? Where would you be today, remembering that, as I said, people will very often leave the market but be slower in moving back in? And what you can see is, as a result of cash returns following COVID being very low, as well as seeing that income coming out of the account, that regular income, that person is significantly worse off in this scenario. Now, if I want to be really dramatic, let's take it back to the last major event or downturn that was prior to COVID. And this is the global financial crisis. At the time of that crisis, I was actually working for the Australian Financial Review as an educator, and I can remember how we really did think, certainly in talking to a lot of investors, that the end was not in sight. We really didn't know where this was going to go. But where it ended up going was after significant downturn, after emotion and volatility, and a lot of people having to be brave, is that we've seen some of the strongest market returns in recent history. And so if someone was brave enough with that $300,000 initial investment that they're taking withdrawals from each year as income, that in spite of the GFC, in spite of the tech downturn, in spite of COVID, we're seeing that they're actually significantly better off today than where they started. And again, this has been the benefit of strong returns. But what if you were that person that moved to cash? And again, this is being done intentionally to show the dramatic nature of the outcome. If you had moved to cash, you would have effectively locked in, or what we call crystallised, those losses, and you're then taking withdrawals for that income, significantly depleting the balance. And what I'm trying to say here is that you don't need to choose one of these two extremes, but think about what will make you comfortable to actually give you some safety and security at night when it comes to volatility of markets, but still give you some exposure to growth opportunities with your investments. We want you to sleep soundly, but we do not want you to do that at the expense of increasingly depleting your balance or doing that in an accelerated way. So it's important to talk to someone in these events or to consider it yourself. What time frame do you still have ahead of you? Is it years or is it decades? Because the answer to that, and even though we can't predict our end, the answer to what you think might be reasonable will actually drive some of your behaviour or what you should be thinking about. Also think about your risk tolerance. Are you going to cope with volatility? Do you need some way of flattening that or buffering it? What do you need to do to, as I said, sleep well at night? But thirdly, and very importantly, think about the level of returns that you want from your superannuation investments. You cannot get strong returns without volatility exposure. So if you are wanting high returns, but you're not willing to be exposed to volatility, it means that you need to think about those expectations you have. Talk to us to try and find balance across these three things, or yourself, get onto our website and do an investor profile to get a sense for how you might feel when markets move. The other important thing though, when it comes to retirement, and this is certainly something that I've seen with my own parents who, as I said, are both in their 90s, so have been retired for some decades. It's not just vital that you think around the way you're invested, but it's also important to invest in yourself. And Rhonda made some beautiful reflections about this, both in terms of herself as well as with her friends. When it comes to your own retirement, you have to think about what you are achieving beyond the financial. What to you means living a full life? Think way back to that first session where we talked about your superannuation, your age pension paying for your needs, but also giving you license to explore and enjoy those wants. What are your wants? And what is it that you can do even beyond the financial? Think about the connections and the relationships that you had. Like Rhonda talked about, you might choose to remain in the workforce in some capacity or volunteer or do other things just so you've got that social connection. Remember too, though, that this gives you freedom of choice. Your superannuation, and if it's performing well for you, and if you've got income that is providing for both those wants as well as those needs, gives you freedom. So it's really important that you think about your retirement in a holistic sense, not just the financial. Think also about your physical well-being, your mental well-being, and your connection to community. Now, I want to go over to a wonderful recording from one of our Super Insider podcasts that was made earlier this year that Anne Fuchs actually explored where we could think about retirement beyond just the financial. We'll see you back here in about 15 minutes.
I know you have spoken a lot about holistic planning. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. So this was a model that was developed in the US. It's called a holistic retirement planning model, and it's also dynamic, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So the model was developed by Mo Wang, who's probably recognised in the world as the leading expert in retirement.
And this person's in the US?
And he's in the US, yeah. And we had a look at some of the theories that he had and saw if we could put it into practice.
Okay,
and we could.
Fascinating. Okay.
Yeah. So, and then what we've been building on from Mo's work is these 6 key buckets of resources that people need in retirement. Should I tell you about those?
You should absolutely tell me and our listeners and viewers about those.
I'll tell everybody about them. So there's 6 buckets that we like to focus on in terms of what resources you need for a good retirement, for retirement adjustment. There's wealth, so money. There's health. There's social, so social connections. There's emotions and your own sort of psychological well-being. Then there's goal setting and cognition. So all of those components, those 6 components, are important for retirement adjustment. And as those resources go up and down, so does retirement adjustment. But not all of those resources are equal. Some are more important than others.
So retirement adjustment sounds like a technical psychological term.
Mm-hmm.
And does it just mean how you adjust to not working anymore?
It's how you adjust to a new lifestyle, really.
Yeah.
It's how much you might miss work or not miss work, how much you feel like you're making a contribution, being recognised, feeling satisfied that you're enjoying life in general, and that you've made a good decision to retire. So all of those components.
A lot of those things that you've just listed off of the 6, they're all kind of dependent upon each other, because if one is out of whack, you could throw another one really out of whack.
Very true. And when you have a look at those 6 different buckets of resources, they're interconnected. The ones that are most interconnected are finances and health. We found those to be equally important. And if you thought about it as a pyramid, then at the top of the pyramid is finances and health, and they're interchangeable.
It's interesting that health, I think you listed sort of your psychological well-being as separate to health.
I did.
Tell me about that.
So and this is the model that Mo developed, he separated out emotions, and we did find that emotions were important, but the physical health aspects of that were more important in terms of that health at the top of the pyramid. And the reason being that if people have a problem with their health and they've got to exit work early, that might mean that they're retiring with less.
Yeah, okay.
But similarly, if they're going into retirement and they're ill, then they may have to use some of the nest egg they put aside to deal with health issues.
Okay, which then can create worries, which creates well-being, sort of stress, which can then flow on to other
absolutely other areas.
Yeah, and also too probably a lot of these things that we talk about, like that you've just referenced. It costs money to be happy sometimes too, to have societal connections if you wanted to go up to the pub and have a punt with your mates on a Saturday. And
money gives you access to options, doesn't it, really?
Yeah.
And so whether or not that's social aspects or health aspects or, cognitive aspects or housing aspects, all of those things are connected back in some way. And there is a sort of like an exchange between those different areas. But I think what's most important to remember is that when we're having a look at those resources, that people might have been focusing just on the finance component of it. And if all those other bits aren't being attended to, then that might reduce retirement adjustment.
So do you almost have like a spider map where you're where they're all? I've got this a spider map where you've got those kind of 6 things around a circle, and you're almost as a person you're kind of thinking, well, how am I at here in terms of well-being?
You could, but I look at it as a pyramid, and the reason I do as layers is because some of the resources are better at predicting retirement adjustment than others.
Okay, so tell me about that.
So the top of the tree is finances and health. In the middle, you've got social. And then at the bottom, you've got emotional, motivation and cognition. Okay. So it's that order. So getting those things right at the top of the tree, so health, wealth and social, will account for a lot of the retirement adjustment that we need.
So from a weighting point of view, they've got a much higher weighting.
Yes, they do have a more higher weighting. Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it.
So if our listeners are thinking about retirement and this is making sense to them, how would you explain to somebody how to actually approach this if this is resonating?
We developed some modules that we've got available, and there's an article that I've at Macquarie Uni that online modules that people can do that will help them to explore some of these areas, particularly the finances and health piece. But what we added into the model that's quite new is the careers area. Because when you leave, work will matter. So if people need to start thinking about resources that they've got, thinking about how and when they'll leave work, how they're going to spend time when they go into retirement, because that will be determined to some extent by their health. So if they haven't got good health, then that will be interconnected. And then also how much money they need to be able to fund the lifestyle that they want to live. So just some key important questions around those 3 areas is a great place to start.
In your experience, do you see people that are the ones who are, you see them on the news, someone who's a 99-year-old, Esme, she's jumping out of a plane. She's been
Yes.
volunteering for the RSPCA.
Yeah.
And are there any kind of, I don't know, reflections you've had about
Sure.
what keeps people healthy, alert and happy?
Yeah. Well, let me just say, I think the reason that she's on TV is because she's probably one of a kind.
Oh, that is
Right.
so
The reason that people draw attention to those sorts of role models is because they're unique. So if everyone wants to use Esme as their measure of success, they're probably going to be disappointed. And for every one Esme, there'll be lots of other people who may experience ill consequences from, drinking, eating the wrong foods, not exercising, all of the sorts of things that would keep us healthy. So I think sometimes the reason that those models get used as examples is because they're extraordinary. And I really hate those images of people jumping out of aeroplanes or, jumping on the back of a jet ski or just doing things that may not be typical activities. Like, what's wrong with pushing a trolley down the middle aisle of Audi?
Yeah. Nothing. My husband loves Aldi. He's German. It's his greatest national treasure.
So there you go.
So the cognitive element, I think something that probably isn't spoken about a lot is cognitive decline, particularly, and the impact of well-being. Tell us about how this impacts retirement and people's decisions.
I think, let me just talk about cognitive decline in general to begin with. I mean, people can be fully functional with mild cognitive impairment and still enjoy life, but there's lots of different reasons. People automatically jump on the idea that, it's dementia, but we look at menopause as one potential source of change in cognition. The other one's mood, so anxiety and depression. When people have low mood affect, then it's likely to affect their cognition as well. We don't necessarily think about that, and it could be transient, right? These things may not be permanent changes. So if you're making a decision based on cognition that you don't think you're going to be able to continue the job that you do now because of cognition, well, it's not a bad idea to eliminate some of those other possibilities before you jump to dementia.
Just go, or that before you go and just quit work because you think you can't, your mental load can't handle it anymore, that you actually go and validate what's wrong with you, go to the doctor before you go and quit.
Absolutely. I mean, getting clarity on what's happening is so important in that area, because the other thing I see is people withdrawing from activities when they've got what they believe to be some cognitive impairment, and maybe this could be things to do socially, so they're not engaging as well socially. One woman said to me one day, I don't play bridge anymore because I can't count the cards, and I'm worried that other people will notice and then they'll eliminate me from their other social activities as well. So getting some clarity.
What did you say to her?
I said to her, well, how do you know that you've got a decline? And she said, well, it's taking me longer to count the cards. I said, haven't you noticed similar things with your friends, that they're taking a bit longer as well? And she said, oh, no, maybe not as much as me. But that's what we would sort of expect to see, where people are putting a focus back on themselves and not looking at those other comparisons. But more importantly, not getting clarity from an expert, so not going to see their doctor or not going to see a psychologist or a neuropsychologist.
I loved before when we were prepping for the show, and you referenced something about your teenage daughter forgetting.
Yes.
What was that? That was a cracker of a story.
Yeah, I was at a community event and a woman came up to me and she said, I think I might have dementia, because I was talking about, dementia and not sort of overthinking it. And she said, I put on my shoes and I pulled my socks over the top of it. I think I have dementia. I asked her what had been going on. She'd just moved into retirement village. Her husband had died not long ago. There was a lot of things happening in her life. But I said, I hear these stories all the time. I said, I heard a story yesterday of someone who, when the sugar container was empty, put the scoop back in the sugar container and put the sugar on top. I said, do you think that person has dementia? And she said, it sounds to me like they might. And I said, well, I better get going, because I've got to go home and tell my 14-year-old daughter that she could have dementia, But it's those sorts of things where, you think you overgeneralise when something happens. If you'd been 20 years younger, you wouldn't have even considered it as an option.
So what impact does social connection, that a lot of people idolize, that's the wrong word, but sort of this volunteering and in retirement, is a thing that gets put up on a pedestal, but not a lot of people actually do it. Certainly in the circles
Right.
But what are your observations?
I think
around
people are important in retirement. I'll just say that I think loneliness is a chronic problem. I think being isolated socially can have negative consequences from a health perspective. And what we do see is that when people retreat and they're on their own, then cognition usually declines as well. So people
there
are
is a
important.
link. There is a link.
Yeah, there is. So the loneliness thing is important. So finding where your tribe is, where that new tribe is. And some people will overestimate the amount of connections they have with people at work. And not go out and explore and make those new connections. But I think it's so important for people to connect with other people on a regular basis, even if it's once a month.
Jo, you spoke about, says me who should exercise a lot more, but you speak about people who are planning for retirement and they're like, I'm going to play golf or I'm going to do Pilates or can you maybe give some advice to our listeners and viewers around if you're 62, you're planning to retire and you're going to all of a sudden play golf, what should you be doing? But you're not playing it now.
Right. That's a really good point. Well, 62 is an interesting number because 62 hours is the number of hours that you'll have free if you're not working. And so what we have found when we've done research is for every 5 people that say they're going to play golf, only 1 person turns up. People normally return to activities that they did before work got too busy. So we do see a return and a reinvigoration of things that people haven't tried before. But I really think this is a perfect opportunity to get out there and just try different things. Some of the things are going to be great. They're going to be better than you imagined, and some of them are going to be worse. So trying new things and getting out there and just giving it a go is the only way to really do it, and recognising that it is a bit hard. It is a bit hard if you're the newbie on the block and you might have been the expert at work. But everyone's in the same position at some stage.
I think that's why transition to retirement is as a strategy is so fantastic because it creates capacity to reduce your hours, and maybe that's when you can start adjusting into introducing the new things that you want to do.
That's right.
Yeah.
You can start small, right?
Yes.
So if you're going to think that you're going to be playing golf every week, maybe go 4 times a year to start with.
Just better than not going at all.
Not going at all. Or if you think you're going to, and you've got this big plan to go every day to the gym while you're in retirement, maybe you should just go once or twice now to see if you actually like it. Because if it falls over and you've got no other plans or other things you want to explore, you might find yourself a bit disappointed.
Yeah. So, okay, final words of advice to somebody who is thinking about retirement, and what's your sort of strong words of wisdom who is a woman who knows this phase of life inside and out? What would you say?
I would say first thing is don't just focus on your finances.
Yes.
Think about how you're going to be spending those 62 hours and what you're going to be doing, and make sure that 62 hours includes a focus on your health.
Okay. Focus and companionship?
Well, hopefully, if you've got the right activities, you'll weave that in. So you're not doing a lot of individual things, but you're doing group things, group activities as well.
Group activities. Okay. Well, it's been wonderful having you on the show, and certainly for our viewers and listeners, we have plenty of information about things like transition to retirement. If you're, Dr. Jo's just said money's really important. So if you're trying to work out how you can fund your retirement, there's lots of educational episodes that we have on Super Insider to help you get up to speed with that. And you can give us a call and do plenty of reading on the website too. And, reference Dr. Jo, Macquarie University, the wealth of resources you have there.
Yes, we've got some online training modules.
Dr. Joanne Earle, that's where it's at.
Thank you, Anne, and Professor Jo Earle. Isn't she fabulous, Rhonda?
I could listen to her for a very long time, I know that.
Can I ask, well, you've listened to that a couple of times in preparing for tonight. What was something that struck with you? And thank you, by the way, for having me at the desk.
No, that's all right. Look, I think it's one of those things you really never stop learning. And I'm not that far from retirement, and I've got a husband who's been dragged kicking and screaming, so he's going to be watching this before too long. For me, I think hopefully I'll ease into it. It's one easy step. But no, I think you never stop learning, and there's so much to look at. I actually went onto the website to see where I could get further information from, so I will be looking at that as well. But no, it's interesting, and so many of our members concentrate on that financial.
Yep.
they get to retirement, they wake up in retirement, so, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? So really important.
I must admit, my takeaway now, Rhonda, is that as the person who leads the education team, one of my educators saying, well, retirement can't be that far off. I feel like I'm on the clock now. Do you want to take us through the next section?
Absolutely.
And we will keep on moving.
All right, so what else do you have to think about with your superannuation? So we're going to have a look at a few ages. What difference can age make when we talk about putting money into your superannuation? So a little slide outlining a few different ages. Now the first one, and I mentioned this earlier when we talked about downsizing, is that the age limit was dropped from 65 to 55. So it just provides more opportunity for you to put money into super if that's what you choose to do. The next one, so we do have a topic called contribution splitting, and again I'm going to look at that page reference this time. So if you've heard of contribution splitting, or you're in, and it's often where it's a couple and one is older than the other, they may look at moving some of their contributions to their partner's super if they have got earlier access. Now when we talk about contribution splitting, the partner, the older of the two, can't be retired or can't have resigned over the age of 60, they would no longer be eligible. Work test ages. Now, when we turn 67, when our members turn 67, I already am, but when we turn 67 and we've finished work, we may have the occasion, and we're going to look at a little case study in a moment, where we want to put money into super and claim it as a tax deduction. And I'm just going to go back one step, because it's not that long ago, just in the last couple of years, that if you actually finished work, resigned or retired over the age of 67, you actually couldn't put money into super anyway. So now you can right up to your 75th birthday. But if we're talking about putting money in and claiming it as a tax deduction, when you're over the age of 67, you need to meet what we call a works test. So it's not where we're going to sit you down and fire a whole lot of questions at you and treat it as if it's an exam. It's basically working 40 hours within a 30-day period, and that enables you to then put money into your super and claim it as a tax deduction. But there'll be more on that in just a moment. 75 plus. Now, believe it or not, and I don't think I'm going to be one of these people, but we still have members who are over the age of 75 and still loving working. Some of them still work full-time, believe it or not. Others just may work a few days a week or a few days a month. So when you do get to the age of 75, you can no longer contribute to your super. Your employer can still pay the superannuation guarantee, which, as we know, is 12% at the moment, and you can, of course, still put those downsizer contributions into your super because there is no age restriction. So that's how age matters. We'll look now at the work test and how that may apply to someone when they are in retirement. So we've got a couple here. We've got Deirdre and Roberta. So they're both over the age of 67 and they both work a bit. They do have some tax they would like to reduce, and so they're hoping that they can put some money into their superannuation and claim it as a tax deduction. So I'll just explain that, of course, they can put it in right up until the age of 75, depending on balance limits, of course. But will it be impacted as to what they can do depending how many hours they are working? So if we have a look here, we've got Deirdre over the age of 67, and she just works once a year as an exam supervisor, so probably ex-education, but she works in a chunk of 60 hours over 2 weeks. So she's going to meet the criteria by the looks. Whereas Roberta actually works more hours throughout the year. You'll see she actually works 7 hours a week. So collectively she works more hours, but not in that larger chunk. On top of that, Roberta actually volunteers for 10 hours a week. So the outcome is, yes, Deirdre will be able to put that money into super and claim a tax deduction. Not so in Roberta's case, because her work is more spaced out and volunteering is not counted. But if you look at it, she's working 7 hours a week at Bunnings, over the course of 4 weeks, for example, it's 28 hours. It wouldn't take too much to step up those hours just for a short time just to enable her to do that. So there always are ways and means around it. Now, how do you follow your super? Back when I started a few moons ago, many moons ago, we would have people literally heading out to their letterbox to wait for that lovely big envelope to arrive with their member benefit statement in it. And of course, that's now all changed where you can log on, have a look at your super, basically any hour of the day. But just be mindful, we'd love you to keep track of your super. Yes, you can look at that in your member statement. It's a really good snapshot of what's happened at the end of the financial year, whereas if you're looking on a daily basis, absolutely you will see your balance changing, hopefully going up, but you'll see things like how your investment options are doing, is your employer contributing in, and so forth. Checking, another one is you can check on beneficiaries too. So of course we've got apps that you can look at, we've got the member online, so we just encourage you to keep looking. Now, we're going to be looking now just at a few other things to think of. So I'll just touch on a few. Keeping your super safe. So Josh alluded to this earlier. So just remember, we would never ring you and say, we'd like some information, we need a payment, tell us your personal details. It just doesn't happen. We have that 3-step verification now to actually access your super online. And for those that may be a little bit worried, I do know at times you can actually add additional questions. So this might be Rhonda saying, I'm a little bit nervous about ringing on my behalf, someone ringing on my behalf to find out information. So I can have a couple of questions added that only I would know the answers to, just to make it a little bit safer in my mind and keep me a little bit more relaxed when it comes to that. So that's just something else you can consider as well. Super scams, of course. I mean, we do have scammers out there. We've got a wonderful podcast that we'd love you to listen to, and it's Anne again. She has a whole range of podcasts on all sorts of interesting topics, so we'd encourage that as well. Now, we're just going to have a little break now, just for a moment or so, and this video will play in the background just for a moment. We'll be back shortly. So back again, and honestly, it's one of those things we don't like to think that people are taken advantage of, but it's just be mindful if you see a situation that may possibly look like elder abuse, and it just gives you a bit of an idea as to what those different areas are. So I'm now just going to touch on planning ahead for later in your life. Now again, I meet some members who have things so well organised and others who don't have anything in place at all. And again, I'll refer you to your little booklet of page 27. But there certainly are steps that you can put in place to make things easier for both yourself and your loved ones. So a will is the first one, where basically you are telling or explaining to your executor how you would like your assets distributed. The enduring power of attorney is actually creating someone that you trust to be looking after you when it comes to financial decisions and to sign on your behalf. Now, a enduring guardian is a little bit different in that you're appointing someone that you trust, but it's really more about your health and welfare condition. So quite different, quite separate, not necessarily the same person. As well as that, you can put an advanced care directive in place, and that's for medical practitioners, just explaining what type of medical procedures you would and would not like to happen in later years. Financial plan, and again, we'd always say keep your fingers or whatever onto your super, just keep looking at it. Situations do change. We always want you to check to see if there's anything that we can help you with, but for you to watch as well. And again, are you drawing too much down? Are you not spending the money that's coming out? Are you drawing too little and could possibly be drawing down more? But just do manage that as well. And lastly, the nomination of beneficiaries. So you can choose to put a nomination in where again you're telling your super fund or ART exactly where you would like your superannuation and in some cases insurance to go to. So again, I've met some people who have got all of these in place, and I'm sure when things do happen that their families will be very grateful for that. I have to say I'm over most of these, not all of them, but I am gradually working my way through it. Now I'm just going to pass you back to Josh. She's just going to run through the next steps as we're winding up.
Thank you very much, Rhonda. And if I can just make a couple of reflections on that section that Rhonda has just gone through. As I've said a number of times, I've got two parents who are in their 90s. I've got a father who has quite progressed dementia and is in permanent care. And I've got a mother who has had recent battles with cancer. It really is important that you make sure that you talk now, especially if you're healthy, especially if you're in your younger years of retirement, that you talk to your family now, talk to your kids, talk to trusted loved ones about the plans that you need to put in place around your estate and also your wishes. Please, please take it from me. These are not things that you want to be doing in the emotion of the moment or when these decisions are actually thrust upon you. They're put upon you not because you want them, but because there's no alternative. So please do think about that. The other thing, though, is to also think about what we've discussed tonight. And we encourage you to pick up on some of the areas that Rhonda really has explored with you, as well as thinking about the investments that we've gone through. So do refer to your workbooks and consider the way you're invested. And we've had a couple of questions come in Q&A, and I encourage you to please keep putting those questions in. We'll come to those in a moment. But also think about your age pension, and what Rhonda talked about wasn't just what the age pension may be at the beginning, but decisions you make throughout your retirement and how they may impact your age pension. It's important you understand that and think about your age pension as being something that fluctuates and changes as other parts of your life also change, and be ahead of that. And also review your plans for later in life, as Rhonda has just spoken to. If I can also invite you to speak to one of our wonderful team. After tonight, or after the last 4 weeks, in fact, we encourage you to look at the videos of these events, explore online, but if you need guidance, reach out to one of our team for some general direction or general advice. They're very happy to assist you. If you want some deeper advice with one of our advisors, we can also assist you there. But again, I encourage you, where you already have your own financial advisor, please engage with them on anything that we may have covered off tonight or over recent weeks that has caused you either concern, thoughts around an opportunity, or you may just want to check in. The other thing I'd like to do is just promote a couple of events that we've got coming up. On the 20th of November, so in a couple of weeks' time from this broadcast, we've got our annual member meeting. So we encourage you through our website, if you'd like to come along to that, please do register. That will be on the 20th of November in person here in Brisbane, but also available online nationally. And there'll also be an event prior to the annual member event, which is with our Chief Economist, Brian Parker, and our Head of Advocacy, Anne Fuchs. Also, on the 10th of December, for those of you who may be one of our Q defined benefit members, we've got a webinar that is taking place for you to check in on your defined benefits, to help you with your understanding and help you in shaping your plans for your retirement. So again, that's something available on our website, and if it's pertinent to you, we encourage you to join in for that. So, Rhonda, we have had a number of questions that have come in. There's actually been a flurry over the last 10 minutes. But the first one I'd like to ask you is, are you able to live overseas once retired? And maybe just paraphrasing a little bit, what would the impact be to both the age pension but also to any superannuation income?
Again, in my customer service days, I have met a number of our members who did live overseas, and they did continue to access their superannuation. They often felt that they liked the idea of it still growing in Australia, even though they were living overseas. I think in some circumstances, age pension is available to be accessed overseas. It's not something I've looked into particularly, in depth, but I do know that there is criteria to be met, and you've got to come back to Australia a certain amount of time, and some allowances aren't available, but I think there is some scope there as well.
So again, probably much like you talked about, we've got the FISOs or FISOs who can really help give. They're actually the people who understand all the ins and outs and the rules and requirements. So if it is probably something that you're thinking about, maybe act on it before you go overseas.
Take those steps first.
While we're talking about age pension, how much, or actually thinking about the gifting that you covered off, how much can you give to your children before you reach retirement age, before it becomes an implication?
Well, the gifting rules are still going to apply, and they basically do look back. And I know you do hear the odd horror story where someone, and I don't know whether it was for real or not, but someone would gift their family the farm and then rock up the next day to Centrelink and say, am I entitled to a benefit, only to find out they had to wait the 5 years. So they certainly do look into exactly what you have been doing. I guess if you do it early enough, till you're so many years, the 5 years out from age pension age, possibly, but you just do have to be very careful.
Yep. Thank you very, very much. We have also had someone who has asked, can I contribute to super if I'm still retired? Now, as Rhonda covered off at the end there are really age conditions that apply to contributions. The only exception to that, other than the fact you've got to be 55, but if you're retired, that's probably the case, is with the downsizer of your family home. There's actually no age restrictions or cap restrictions there. But as Rhonda outlined, really when it comes to contributions, yes, you can contribute once you've retired, but you've just got to be considerate of some of those ages and the caps that would still apply with that. Rhonda, they're coming in. Sorry, the messages are flowing in as we're coming through.
I wouldn't mind just commenting on what concessions are available for those that are not eligible for the pension, only because I've actually been looking into it myself, because I'm not on the age pension, even though I'm over the age limit. And again, have a look on the age pension website on the ART website, but also on the Services Australia. And I can tell you there are things like a reduction in your car registration. There's a little payment towards your power. You do, of course, get travel discount, although living in Queensland with our 50-cent fares, it's capped at 50% whether you're a senior or not. So no, there actually are some advantages, and there have to be, I guess, in being an older Australian, but certainly recommend having a look just to work out exactly what you can claim. Yep. And of course that senior, the healthcare card is one to look at too.
And I think it's also important to know that or to remember that although you may not qualify for the age pension today, it may be something that you qualify for down the track.
Absolutely.
So it's important, again, to think about as your circumstances change, as you see your retirement funding situation change, the age pension may become a really important part later on. I think especially as we see people with more superannuation balances initially as that draws down.
And that often is the case. And, I do say to members, look, yes, because sometimes our members retire at the age of 60, so automatically they're way too young to be eligible for the age pension. But then, at 67, no, they may not qualify then. But at some stage, as their assets are going down, when the age pension does kick in.
A question's come in about, please explain the difference between deemed income and actual income, particularly in the context of the income test. Last week, we actually had a video where Anne Fuchs, who did the interview tonight, actually spoke to a specialist at Services Australia, particularly about deeming. So if you haven't watched it yet, I'd really encourage you to go back to that video, or it's actually available as one of our podcasts. But basically what the government does is when it comes to things like your investments in shares or superannuation or other investable assets, is they realise that day to day, week to week, month to month, those can fluctuate. So rather than actually try and think about them as being like, really they'd have to be assessing them on a daily basis. So what deeming actually does is effectively ignores the income that you actually earn because of those fluctuations, and instead sets a percentage that the government basically assumes that asset would provide. That is actually based on how much you hold in assets. So there's an upper threshold and a lower threshold that applies. They've recently been updated. But as I said, it was actually a point we covered quite significantly last week in that interview. And I would encourage you to look at that. But Rhonda, I don't know whether you've got anything else on that.
No, but I wouldn't mind just commenting on the one. We've had a little question come in, and this is quite a common question as well, where someone's talking about, yes, we do need to continue to invest when you're in the retirement phase in order to beat inflation. And do you think, given market volatility, you need to set aside 5 years worth of living expenditure in a lower risk option? What we would say to that is, and again, we talk about the bucket strategy, where when you move into retirement, that you can set up a possibly 3 to 5 years worth of living expenses, possibly put that in a lower risk option, so that as you're drawing down, the money's just swimming along nicely, and you may be able to put other money in higher or, medium or above the lower risk options. And so you're getting that growth. There may be the volatility, but you're not actually drawing down from those options at that stage. So no, that is quite a common one called the bucket strategy. Yep. Lots of information out there for you.
Absolutely. And I think it also, though, talks to the fact that in thinking, the bucket strategy is a great one that we do often talk about, but it's still important to also think around that can't give you comfort overall, that there may still be the need to think about what your investments are doing overall, not just thinking about putting this little bit away in cash and almost ignoring the rest. So just be conscious of anything that you do in that space, just thinking about that overall strategy. A question that's come in, and I think this might be one of the last ones that we have, is can my wife and I join our superannuation accounts together? No, you can't. The government requires that superannuation is something that you actually hold in your own name. We talked about it last week that as you lead into retirement, there might be ways for you to think about transferring balances between accounts, and there could be really great reasons for doing that. It could help in accessing the age pension. It could actually help in changing tax status for estate benefit purposes. There's a whole range of reasons why you may want to move money around between a couple, but no, you can't merge two accounts together. Your super is your super, and the government assesses that in terms of legislation, taxation, and age pension as well. So just be mindful of that. And again, probably last week's video of these these events, we'll go into a bit more detail as to when you may want to think about transferring money across balances. So, Rhonda, that's really all the questions that we've had come in. Is there anything, before I do wrap up, is there anything more that you'd like to reflect on or comment on? And then we'll...
No, other than possibly if any of our members see us when we're caravanning around Australia, don't hesitate to come and say hello. Hopefully that's in the next year or two. But I know I think it's just learning, honestly, and I feel very fortunate to have come into a superannuation company. I was in my mid-50s by the time I actually started working in the super world, and there's so much to learn. And so don't ever be embarrassed or think your question's silly, because I think overall there are some people that have a lot of knowledge about super. There's a lot of people that don't know possibly as much as they should, and that's what we're there to help you with.
A couple of months ago, I was having coffee at my local cafe. I kid you not. I was having coffee at my local cafe in the northwest suburbs of Sydney, and a person came up to me and said, I just want to thank you. I've listened to your podcasts, I've attended your events, and I'm living retirement. And for me, it was one of the most special moments. It was actually quite beautiful. The person I was with thought I'd done it as a setup, but what I'd like to also take the time to do is just make a couple of very quick thank yous. This has been a huge production over the last 4 weeks. We've had a wonderful team moderating each week, looking at your questions coming in, making responses, but also feeding those questions through to us for Q&A. And we've had an incredible team in the background here in the studio helping us go live every week. We've actually changed things up quite a bit over the last few weeks, and we look to actually continue doing that into 2026. But other than if we see you at some of our events that are coming up, I would like to thank you all for your time, wish you a fabulous end to the year, and hopefully we'll see you all again very soon. Have a very happy retirement if it's somewhere that you are or that you are very close to, Rhonda. And for the rest of us, let's keep aspiring to it. Thank you very much. Have a good night. Thanks, Rhonda.
Thank you.
Hey, Sue!
Bev, you're sitting on a monster.
Literally and figuratively. It's my superannuation from Australian Retirement Trust.
Australian Retirement Trust. Right.
Big, isn't it? Comes with an app.
I gotta get me one of those.
One day, I'll unleash it on the world, maybe even Barbados. Barbados, baby!
Awaken your super with Australian Retirement Trust.